It started with a whisper, then it became a scream. Arnold Schwarzenegger stood in front of the mirror in 1981, and for the first time in his life, he couldn't recognize himself. Not because he looked different, but because the man staring back at him was no longer the man he had built his entire identity around. His muscles were still massive, his chest still broad, his arms still carved like marble. But something was wrong. Something inside the machine had started to rust. Arnold was 34 years old. He had been the greatest bodybuilder in the world for 7 consecutive years. 7 times Mr. Olympia champion, a title that nobody had ever won before him. He had redefined what the human body could become. He had pushed past every limit. He had achieved the impossible. And now, he was about to discover that achievement was fragile, that dominance was temporary, that the body, even a body as sculpted as his, was mortal. The first warning came during a casual training session. Arnold was doing his usual routine, heavy weights, maximum intensity, the same training that had built his legend. He was in the middle of a set of barbell rows when something tore in his lower back. Not a sharp pain, a dull, deep sensation. Something inside had given way. Arnold ignored it. Pain was weakness leaving the body. That was his motto. That was what he believed. So he finished the set. He finished the workout. He went home and stretched it out. But it didn't get better. Days turned into weeks. The pain got worse. Arnold couldn't train like before. His range of motion was limited. His strength was diminishing. For the first time in his life, his body was telling him no. And Arnold didn't know how to listen. He went to the doctor. The diagnosis was brutal. Severe lower back strain. Herniated disc. The doctor told him what he didn't want to hear. You need to stop heavy training. Your back is damaged. If you continue, you could cause permanent injury. Arnold left the office furious. Stop training? That was like telling him to stop breathing. His entire identity was built on training, on pushing, on winning. Training wasn't something he did. It was who he was. So he didn't stop. He modified. He trained lighter. He used machines instead of free weights. He tried to compensate. But deep down, he knew the truth. He couldn't compete anymore. His body wouldn't allow it. The real shock came when he looked at the calendar and realized Mr. Olympia 1981 was in 3 months. Arnold had never missed a competition. Never. He had won every single time. But now, the thought of stepping on that stage terrified him. Not because he feared losing, but because he knew with absolute certainty that his body wouldn't be ready. He could have retired gracefully. He could have walked away undefeated. But Arnold didn't work that way. He had never backed down from a challenge in his life. So he made a decision. He would compete anyway, injured back and all. What followed was the most brutal 6 weeks of his life. Arnold trained through the pain. He modified his diet. He did everything he could to bring his body to peak condition. But his back was getting worse, not better. Every posing session was agony. Every heavy set felt like a knife in his spine. By the week of the competition, Arnold could barely walk. His trainer begged him to withdraw. Arnold, you're destroying yourself. This isn't worth it. But Arnold refused. He had never quit. He wasn't about to start now. The night before Mr. Olympia 1981, Arnold sat alone in his hotel room. His back was in spasms. He had taken so many painkillers that he could barely feel his legs. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He was in a state of panic that nobody in the world could see, because the public image was still perfect. The Austrian oak was still undefeated. Arnold Schwarzenegger was still invincible. But alone in that hotel room, the greatest bodybuilder in the world was terrified because he knew what was coming. He knew he was about to lose. The competition started the next morning. Arnold walked on stage, and immediately he could feel the difference. His conditioning wasn't perfect. His muscles weren't as full. His presence wasn't the same. The crowd felt it too. They sensed that something was wrong with their champion. His competitor that year was Mike Mentzer, younger, fresher, stronger. And for the first time in 7 years, Arnold wasn't the obvious champion. The posing round was torture. Every flex sent pain shooting down Arnold's spine. He could barely hold his poses. By the middle of the competition, his entire left leg was numb. He was losing feeling in his foot, but he kept posing. He kept fighting. He refused to show weakness. Then came the moment that changed everything. During the back double biceps pose, the move that required maximum tension and maximum pain, Arnold felt something pop in his back again, a sharp, searing pain that made his vision blur. He stumbled, just slightly, but enough that the judges noticed. Arnold caught himself. He completed the pose, but the damage was done. When the judges announced a winner, it wasn't Arnold. For the first time in 7 consecutive years, someone else won Mr. Olympia. Mike Mentzer raised his arms in victory. The crowd erupted, and Arnold stood there, smile frozen on his face, while his entire world crumbled. He had lost. What happened backstage is what nobody talks about. Arnold collapsed. Not physically, his body held together, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, he shattered. He locked himself in a bathroom and sobbed. The man who had taught the world about strength and determination and never giving up, he was broken, because losing wasn't the real issue. The real issue was what it meant. It meant his body was failing. It meant age was catching up with him. It meant that no amount of willpower could stop the inevitable decline of the human body. It meant that everything he had built, his entire identity, his entire purpose, his entire reason for existence, was temporary. For 3 days after losing, Arnold didn't leave his hotel room. He didn't talk to anyone. He didn't train. He didn't eat. He just sat there, staring at the wall, confronting a truth he had never allowed himself to face. He was not invincible. He was not unstoppable. He was human, and being human meant being vulnerable to failure. But here's where the real story begins. Because on the 4th day, Arnold did something extraordinary. He made a decision. He decided to retire from competitive bodybuilding, not because his body forced him to, but because he chose to, on his own terms. "I'm done," he told his trainer. "I'm not going to compete anymore." His trainer was shocked. "But you can come back. You can train and—" "No," Arnold said firmly. "I don't want to come back. I want to move forward." And that's when everything shifted. Arnold had spent 17 years dedicated to one goal, being the greatest bodybuilder in the world. He had achieved that goal. He had surpassed that goal. He had won everything there was to win. And then, when his body started to fail, he realized something profound. He had built his entire identity on something temporary. So he made a radical decision. He was going to reinvent himself. Arnold began exploring acting. He had done bit parts before, but nothing serious. Now, at 34 years old, with a damaged back and no experience, he decided to become an actor. People thought he was insane. "You're too big," the casting director said. "You're too accented. You're not a real actor. You're a bodybuilder playing a role." But Arnold didn't care about the criticism, because he had already learned the most important lesson of his life. The only real failure is refusing to try after you've fallen. His first real role was Conan the Barbarian in 1982. It wasn't Shakespeare. It wasn't high art. But it was a start, and Arnold approached it with the same discipline he had brought to bodybuilding. He studied. He trained. He worked harder than everyone else. Then came Terminator in 1984. When James Cameron first approached Arnold for the role, Arnold was still considered a joke by Hollywood, a dumb muscle man trying to be an actor. But James Cameron saw something different. He saw someone who had already proven they could master impossible challenges, someone who had already reinvented themselves once. Terminator was a risk. Arnold had no acting experience. His accent was thick. His line delivery was robotic, but that became the character. The Terminator wasn't supposed to sound human. It was supposed to sound cold, machine-like, emotionless. And Arnold's weakness as an actor became his greatest strength. The film was a massive success. Suddenly, Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't a failed bodybuilder anymore. He was a movie star, a bigger star than he had ever been as a bodybuilder. But here's the shocking truth that Arnold never fully admits. If he had won Mr. Olympia in 1981, he would probably still be competing. He would still be a bodybuilder, chasing one more title, one more victory. He would never have become an actor. He would never have become a global icon. He would never have discovered his true potential. His greatest failure was actually his greatest gift. Years later, when Arnold was asked about losing Mr. Olympia in 1981, he gave an answer that shocked everyone. That loss saved my life. If I had won, I would have kept competing until my body completely destroyed itself. But losing forced me to accept that I was human, that I was mortal, and that opened the door to everything else. The injured back that forced him to stop training became the thing that pushed him toward acting. The pain that made him vulnerable became the thing that made him human. The failure that seemed like the end became the beginning of his greatest success. But the real twist came much later. In 2018, Arnold Schwarzenegger had multiple heart surgeries. His health was failing, and during his recovery, he had to confront something he had avoided his entire life: the physical cost of pushing the human body beyond its limits. The back injury in 1981 wasn't just about that competition. It was a sign, a warning that his body was breaking down from the extreme stress he had put it under. And if he had continued competing, if he had won that competition and felt invincible again, he might have pushed himself even harder. He might have destroyed his body completely. So in a strange way, losing that competition in 1981 saved his life. Arnold realized that the greatest strength isn't refusing to fail. The greatest strength is accepting failure and learning from it. The greatest strength is knowing when to stop, when to change direction, when to accept that you are human, and that being human has limits. The shocking moment came when Arnold was recovering from heart surgery, and he looked back at his life. He realized that his bodybuilding career, the thing he had thought was everything, had lasted 17 years. But his acting career lasted much longer. His impact as an actor, as a governor, as a public figure, was infinitely greater than anything he had achieved as a bodybuilder. All because he failed. All because his body broke. All because he had the courage to reinvent himself when his original identity was no longer viable. Here's what nobody expected to happen next. Arnold started a foundation to help young athletes understand that failure isn't the end. That injury isn't a death sentence. That sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is the thing that feels like the worst thing. He became an advocate for mental health, talking openly about his depression after losing, about his struggles with accepting his aging body, about his journey from physical strength to mental strength. And the athletes who benefited most from his message weren't the ones who won. They were the ones who lost, the ones who got injured, the ones whose bodies failed them, the ones who thought their lives were over. Because Arnold understood something that only someone who had experienced catastrophic failure could understand. Life doesn't end when your body breaks. Life doesn't end when you lose. Life ends when you refuse to try again. 20 years after losing Mr. Olympia, Arnold was asked by a young bodybuilder who had suffered a career-ending injury, "How do I move forward? How do I accept that I'll never compete again?" And Arnold looked at him with tears in his eyes and said, "That injury isn't your failure. It's your invitation. It's your body telling you that you're meant for something bigger. Listen to it. Don't fight it. Let it guide you to what you were really supposed to do." The young man went on to become a successful strength coach. He attributed his entire career to that conversation with Arnold, because Arnold had learned the most important lesson. Failure isn't the end of your story. Failure is the beginning. Arnold Schwarzenegger lost Mr. Olympia in 1981, and in losing, he found himself. He found a career that would make him more famous than any bodybuilding title ever could. He found a purpose that was bigger than his muscles. He found a humanity that was more powerful than invincibility. The man who spent his entire life refusing to accept limits finally accepted the one limit that mattered, the limit of a human body. And in accepting that limit, he became truly limitless. His greatest defeat became his greatest victory, and that perhaps is the most important lesson Arnold ever learned. Sometimes you have to lose everything to gain what actually matters.